So this is where you get this line, a woman's right to choose. We go from contraceptives to abortion. What's the difference? You have a baby. That's the difference. And the science tells us that's a baby. And the extremism of the Democrats now is unbelievable. Even Roe sets up a trimester model. And in the last trimester, they don't approve abortion. That states have every right, they say, to intervene to protect the baby, because now there's two people involved. Well, as viability goes back even further and further and further, the trimester model becomes archaic. And so then you have governors like in California and New York and elsewhere saying you can have an abortion paid for by the federal government, but you can have an abortion right up to the last minute. So now we know with 100% certainty the science says that's a baby. So we've gone from contraceptive of a married couple to aborting a baby. That's the problem. I want you to watch this clip as it relates to what I just discussed. You'll see Robert Bork, and then you'll see some commentary, then you'll hear from me. Go.
No civilized person wants to live in a society without a lot of privacy in it. And the framers, in fact, of the Constitution protected privacy in a variety of ways. The First Amendment protects free exercise of religion. The free speech provision of the First Amendment has been held to protect the privacy of membership lists and a person's associations in order to make the free speech right effective. The Fourth Amendment protects the individual's home and office from unreasonable searches and seizures and usually requires a warrant. The Fifth Amendment has a right against self-incrimination. There's much more. There's a lot of privacy in the Constitution. Griswold, in which we were talking about a Connecticut statute which was unenforced against any individual except the birth control clinic. Griswold involved a Connecticut statute which banned the use of contraceptives. There was no, and Justice Douglas ended that opinion with a rather eloquent statement of how awful it would be to have the police pounding into the marital bedroom. And it would be awful, and it would never happen because there is a Fourth Amendment. And the police, nobody ever tried to enforce that statute, but the police simply could not get into the bedroom without a warrant. And what magistrate's going to give the police a warrant to go into search for signs of use of contraceptives? I mean, it's a wholly bizarre and imaginary case. Now, let me say this.
Yield at that point, just for clarification.
Yes, certainly, Mr. Chairman.
If they had evidence that a crime was being committed.
How are they going to get evidence that a couple are using contraceptives?
Wiretap.
Wiretapping?
Wiretap.
They have a
legal wiretap.
You mean to say that a magistrate is going to authorize a wiretap to find out if a couple is using contraceptives?
They couldn't they, the law?
Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
No, I understand that, but under the law, Judge, could they not have? It was a crime, correct?
It was a crime on the statute books which was never prosecuted. Never.
Well, the fact that it wasn't prosecuted did not mean it wasn't a crime, does it?
I have more to say about that, whether it was a crime or not.
Let's assume they were...
Let's stop a second. Here you have one of the great legal geniuses of all time up against one of the stupidest men of all time. What if this, and what if this, and what if this? And the whole case was brought. You heard what I read from the ACLU lawyer, Wolf. They're just trying to chip away to get to abortion. That this is nonsensical. There's never been a wiretap to determine if people are using contraceptives. This law was not enforced in Connecticut. They looked and looked and looked, and they found a law, and they brought it. And even in the Griswold decision, the majority had to lie about the facts of the case. Bork's not playing games. And he's clearly listening to Biden and thinking to himself, oh my God, this guy's dumber than a doorknob, and he's going to vote on whether or not I can be confirmed. Go.
They were also accused of, there was evidence that that they're involved in some other illegal activity, and there was a wiretap.
And they hear discussion of contraceptives?
Yeah.
Nobody is going to get a warrant for that, and no prosecution is going to be upheld for that. And I'd like to go on to that point because
Thank you, sir.
I think the law was an utterly silly law. But my objection is simply to the undefined nature of what the court did there, and I've tried to illustrate that for you by asking you whether you would vote for a statute that said nothing more than that everybody has a right of privacy, and the court shall enforce it. I don't think you would. If Griswold against Connecticut, which established or adopted a privacy right on reasoning which was utterly inadequate and failed to define that right so we know what it applies to, Roe against Wade contains almost no legal reasoning. We are not told why it is a private act. There are lots of private, and if it is, there are lots of private acts that are not protected. Why this one is protected? We're simply not told that. We get a review of the history of abortion, and we get a review of the opinions of various groups like the American Medical Association, and then we get rules. And that's what I object to about the case. It does not have legal reasoning in it that roots the right to an abortion in constitutional materials.
And that is almost word for word what appears in Samuel Alito's draft opinion overturning Roe versus Wade. Samuel Alito was watching that confirmation hearing of Robert Bork on a television in the Reagan Justice Department where he was serving in 1987.
Now it's time to try and destroy Justice Alito. And in 1987, when he was watching the opinion, according to this guy, Lawrence O'Donnell, do you know what position Sam Alito held? He was Deputy Solicitor of the United States. Deputy Solicitor of the United States. That position was a career civil service position. He was not a political appointee. He was not appointed by Ronald Reagan. He'd been there for several years. He got that position purely on merit because of his brilliance, because of his background and experience. He'd been a law clerk at the Supreme Court and elsewhere. Deputy Solicitor of the United States. Go ahead.
With dreams of someday sitting in that chair in the Senate Judiciary Committee in his own Supreme Court confirmation hearing. And when Samuel Alito saw the vote count of Robert Bork's nomination to the Supreme Court, the Senate vote count, Samuel Alito knew he would not ever make the mistake that Robert Bork
Now,
made.
stop there. Lawrence O'Donnell is a liar, in addition to being an imbecile, but he's not alone. So is Joe Biden. So is every Democrat who talks about this, because they're lying. And I want to read to you from that leaked draft, which now is being regularized, normalized, that you can leak drafts from the Supreme Court. Democrats don't want to talk about the leak, much the media don't want to talk about the leak. No, now we're just going to deal with this. Here's what Alito wrote when it comes to these privacy rights issues, as we now call them. Because it was brought up by the Solicitor General of the United States under Biden, unable to show concrete reliance on Roe and Casey themselves. The Solicitor General suggests that overruling those decisions would, quote, threaten the court's precedents holding that the Due Process Clause protects other rights, meaning privacy rights. So they confront this, does Alito and the majority in that draft opinion. That is not correct for reasons we have already discussed, as even the Casey plurality recognized, quote, abortion is a unique act, unquote, because it terminates, quote, life or potential life, unquote. Abortion is, quote, inherently different from marital intimacy, marriage, or procreation, unquote. And to ensure that our decision is not misunderstood or mischaracterized by people like that, we emphasize that our decision concerns the constitutional right to abortion and no other right. Nothing in this opinion should be understood to cast doubt on precedents that do not concern abortion. So Alito and the would-be majority in this draft decision already anticipate and address what this fraud and propagandist is saying, what Schumer's saying, what Biden said, what Pelosi's saying, what they're all saying. That's why I started this program by saying this opinion's relatively modest. It doesn't throw out quote-unquote privacy rights, starting with Griswold. It addresses Roe versus Wade and the follow-up case, Casey. That's it.
Want to see more? Sign up for Levin TV.